Okay, I want to begin by highlighting a peculiar paradox I've noticed from my experiences of working with manuscripts. To work with a manuscript is, I think, to engage in a particularly intimate kind of literary study. There's an undeniable thrill to be had from the fact that the artifact, the physical object before us, was once held by its author or authors, fretted over, modified, carried about, maybe even passed around, read and discussed by the members of a literary circle. The effect is magnified, in my experience, if the manuscript contains the work in progress towards some great work. Thinking of the prelude here as a Wordsworthian. But there's also something terribly alienating about manuscript study. If, as will be common to most, if not all, in this room, the author of our manuscript is deceased, to see in dried ink or pencil the work of a hand that was once warm and capable is a sobering reminder, I think, that our author is no longer with us, and we merely have what he or she has left behind. An indecipherable word, orphaned from the hand which created it, might remain so forever, because though our manuscript may be consulted, our author obviously may not. And now more than ever, it's easy to consult a manuscript, or rather I should say to consult a facsimile of a manuscript, and that distinction upon which this paper rests is important. The concurrent rise of digitization and distribution technologies, of specialist photographic equipment and the World Wide Web, has brought within reach some manuscript facsimiles when access to the artifact itself was once made difficult by a multitude of factors, geographical, economical, even practical. As sophisticated and as useful as digital manuscript facsimiles undoubtedly are, I want to suggest, by drawing on the specific example of DCMS 15, informally known as the Christabel Notebook, two things I suspect anyone who has worked with both physical manuscripts and digital manuscript facsimiles will have intuited. Firstly, that in the process of creating a digital manuscript facsimile, something of the original artifact is silently and irretrievably lost. And secondly, that digital manuscript facsimiles are best used as an adjunct to, rather than a substitute for, working with the physical manuscript itself. So, in the process of digital manuscript reproduction, what is lost? DCMS 15, like any manuscript, conveys a written literary text, and this written text may be accessed through its digital facsimile. Here, beginning 1/3 of the way down the recto side of leaf 3, is a nicely legible fair copy in Wordsworth's hand of a part of the ruined cottage. Access permission permitting, a transcription could be made, or at least attempted, from this, or any other written text reproduced in digital form as an arrangement of pixels, from the screen of any computer at any location in the web-enabled world. This manuscript, again like any other, also conveys several of what may be termed unwritten texts, which I define as non-linguistic signs which speak as something that can be read but which isn't set down in words, of Wordsworth and his circle, his creative practices, and his time. On the verso side of leaf 2, the first work we come across is the concluding lines of Dorothy's fair copy of A Fragment, a Night Piece. Below on the same leaf we have several of Wordsworth's own rough drafts towards the Old Cumberland Beggar. This leaf of DCMS 15 speaks of Wordsworth's domestic circumstances at Alfoxden and also of his creative practice. Dorothy is present here, acting as Wordsworth's amanuensis, the manuscript being passed between the pair at different times. The loose and untidy handwriting, which stands in contrast to the neat, formal fair copy of most of leaf 3, suggests that the drafts of the Old Cumberland Beggar were written at some speed, which in turn suggests that this is early work, a theory supported, I think, by the several seemingly hasty deletions, overwritings, and interlineations. And the fact that Wordsworth has used ink also suggests that these drafts were composed indoors, pencil being the preferred tool for outdoor composition. These are all unwritten texts which are reproduced by the digital manuscript facsimile. But some of the unwritten texts of DCMS 15 can't be reproduced digitally. The unique sensory experience of working with the manuscript, The feel of its laid and wove paper, not at all like the mass-produced pages of a modern edition of Wordsworth's poetry. The faint crackle as the stiff paper, the stiff leaves are gently turned, and the changing fall of light on the pages. Even the faintly musty but not at all unpleasant aroma that reaches the reader as the manuscript is removed from its storage box and opened. All of these things, valuable because they can be read, are lost and are irreproducible. Without words, DCMS 15 speaks of 18th century paper production methods, of the manuscript's unique usage and storage history, of the inherent fragility, instability even, of the manuscript form. Manuscripts are surely repositories of excitingly nascent literary texts, but they themselves, as material objects and artifacts, are also repositories of cultural texts, rich sources of a wealth of non-linguistic information. But perhaps I'm being unfair. To my previous point, one might respond that it was never within the remit of the digital manuscript facsimile to record and reproduce some of the unwritten texts I've spoken of. Such is the quality of present-day digital manuscript facsimiles that overwhelmingly it's true that what they do reproduce, they reproduce exceptionally well. But there are occasions when one of the format's inherent limitations comes to the fore, namely that some features of a physical manuscript simply can't be captured and reproduced adequately. A striking feature of DCMS 15 is its many stubs, the remainders of its many manually excised leaves. When viewed on screen, the stubs are often pressed down flat, two-dimensionally, sometimes in pairs, like this. The page on the right, now only a stub, obviously, once bore a draft, probably in Wordsworth's hand, of the closing lines of the two thieves. Even when we rapidly cycle through such images in sequence, the sense that a large portion of this book has been cut out isn't immediately forthcoming, even when we do sometimes gain a sense of its three-dimensionality, as in this case. On the recto page, now removed, once stood a draft of She Dwelt Among the Untrodden Ways in Dorothy's hand. It's just possible to tell that from the letters that are left. When one actually sees the bare edges of the physical stubs with the manuscript before one, when one actually sees that, the bare edges in 3 dimensions, it's rather shocking, especially to one who's been taught to handle manuscripts with extreme care. and it leads one to ask questions that I'm not altogether sure the user of a digital manuscript facsimile might come to as quickly, if indeed at all. The strong sense of the manuscript being mutilated is irreproducible. Examination of the edges of the stubs leads one to think about the instrument used in their removal. What was it? Were these leaves, especially where a rudely jagged stub remains, removed at speed, perhaps in anxiety or even anger? What happened to the excised leaves? Perhaps while pondering these questions, we'll view the manuscript from a different angle or move it further into the light. This leads me to my next point, which is that some of the vanishings of the process of manuscript reproduction might be said to be vanishings of possibility. When working with digital manuscript facsimiles, it's impossible to reproduce several of the working practices that only access to the physical manuscript can accommodate. As mentioned previously, the viewer might change his or her angle of viewing, or might somehow adjust the fall of light upon the manuscript. The viewer may prefer to examine it, if possible, in natural rather than artificial light. Sometimes a magnifying glass can be more versatile and can yield better results than a digital zoom. As an example of this particular larger vanishing, consider the verso side of leaf 94.